Welcome to the week number 6 overview from Managerial Economics here at Rutgers University in Camden. And this week we are reviewing chapters 8, which is competitive firms and the markets. And there's a couple of important subsections in this chapter that you should be aware of, and I'm just going to give you a brief overview and summary of the important bits of information. Make sure you understand what is meant by perfect competition, the assumptions behind perfect competition, the fact that the demand curve is horizontal, and why the characteristics of the demand of a perfectly competitive market cause that. And also realize that firms that are in perfectly competitive markets are price takers, that the world market sets the price and that individuals accept that price. Also, realize that with competition in the short run that firms are going to be attempting to maximize profits, and this means that they are going to set output levels where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So realize that because the price is set, the decision of a firm in a perfectly competitive marketplace is going to be an output determination. So in perfect competition, it's going to set output where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, and marginal revenue is equal to the price in a perfectly competitive market. So make sure you remember that and realize that. Firms cannot enter in the short run, another important thing to remember. Also, there's no entry or exit are important to understand in the short run. Also realize that a firm can choose to shut down in the short run, specifically when the price is below average variable cost. So a firm in a perfectly competitive marketplace will choose to shut down when the price is less than average variable cost because it can actually lose less money by shutting down in the short run. Also, the competition in the long run. Realize that in the long run, a competitive firm sets its output where the market price equals its long run marginal cost. Also, it shuts down if the market price is less than the minimum of the long run average cost curve, because all costs are avoidable in the long run. So make sure you understand that distinction and the distinction between the decisions that are made in the short run versus the long run. Consequently, the competitive firm's long-run supply curve is the long-run marginal cost above the minimum of the long-run average cost curve. So make sure you remember that distinction. Also, the last section in this chapter talks about competition maximizing well-being, and realize that perfect competition maximizes a commonly used measure of economic well-being, total surplus. Realize what total surplus is. It's the monetary value of the gain from trade, and it is the sum of consumer surplus and producer surplus. Consumer surplus is the economic benefit or well-being obtained by a consumer in excess of the price paid. Make sure you know how we look at it graphically. It equals the area under the consumer's demand curve above the price up to the quantity that the consumer buys. Also, there's producer surplus. Producer surplus is the amount producers are paid over and above the minimum amount needed to induce them to produce a given level of product. All right. So producer surplus is the area below the price but above the supply curve. So make sure you're comfortable with all those points with perfect competition. Now we move into monopoly, and monopoly is at the other end of the competitive spectrum, where perfect competition is the most competitive, monopoly is the least competitive. So make sure you have a good understanding of that fact, and also have a good understanding of perfect competition so you can contrast it with the conditions in monopoly. So monopoly, profit maximizing. Same as in perfect competition. It's where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. A monopoly makes a positive profit if average cost is less than the price at the profit maximizing output level. The next section discussed is market power. Realize what market power is. It's the ability of a firm to significantly affect the market price. So in perfect competition, there was no effect on price, and in monopoly, there is some discretion over pricing. And the extent a firm has market power depends on the shape of the demand curve. Also, this notion of market failure due to monopoly pricing. Realize that a monopoly's price is above its marginal cost. Too little output is produced relative to perfect competition, and society suffers deadweight loss. So make sure you have a good notion of what deadweight loss is, and how it relates to monopoly. Also, we take a look at the causes of monopoly. Realize that a monopoly may occur because it has lower operating costs than any rival that is potentially out there. They might have superior knowledge or control of a key input. So make sure you have a good understanding of what may cause that. Also, make sure you understand the term a natural monopoly, and that is when a firm can reduce a market output at lower average cost than a larger number of firms. So realize that there's the fact that if it's one firm that they can produce at much lower cost as opposed to several firms doing this. Also realize that governments create monopoly, which prevent other firms from entering the marketplace. Also realize the role of patents in the production of monopoly. Also realize the role of advertising. A monopoly can advertise or engage in promotional activities with the aim to shift its demand curve to the right and make it less elastic, so people will be less responsive to changes in price. And also realize these notions of networks, dynamics, and behavioral economics. If a good has a positive network externality so that its value to a consumer grows as the number of units sold increases, then current sales affect a monopoly's future demand curve. A monopoly may maximize its profits over time by setting a low introductory price in the first period in which it sells the good, and later raising its price as the product's popularity ensures large future sales at a higher price. So realize that dynamic nature of that monopolists may choose in the short run deliberately to lose money in order to take advantage of any network effects that product might have. Consequently, the monopoly is not maximizing its short-run profits in the first period, but maximizing it over time. Make sure you understand that long-run profit maximization versus short-run profit maximization, particularly with goods that have a network effect. Also, have an understanding of what behavioral economics is and how it is important, particularly for the topic that we're talking about here. In particular, have a notion of what bandwagon effects and snob effects are.